Awesome. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you might be joining us from. Welcome to our Day in the Life series. We're so excited to have you all here with us today, where you'll get to learn from recent grads and new employees about the impact that they've made here at Microsoft and a little bit about their lives here at the company. This is a great way to get some exposure into what a long-term career can look like inside Microsoft, and we're so happy to share it with you. Looking at our agenda today, we've got 3 employees who are going to present sort of a quick 10-minute lightning talk. And at the end of the talks, we're going to leave plenty of room for Q&A. For those of you who have questions, feel free to type them into the chat as they come to you. If it's for a specific presenter, please be sure to put the presenter's name at the beginning of your question. That way, when we get to the end of the presentation and all 3 presenters have talked, we know who you wanted to hear from for that particular question. For folks who are also following along in the chat, feel free to upvote any questions that come in that you would also love to hear an answer to. At the end, we'll be going in order of highest liked question first. Great. We also have some virtual moderators who are standing by to answer any questions that are not to our speakers, but perhaps about our recruitment process or more logistics of the company. We'd love for you to be able to really learn what you need from this presentation. So don't be afraid. There are no bad questions. We all have them. So please don't be shy, ask away, and we are super excited to share with you about Microsoft and our life here. So I've been talking for a couple minutes now. It's probably best for me to introduce myself. I am Allison Wines. I am a 5-year program manager here at Microsoft. I was a 2014 intern. It feels like a lifetime ago. I've met some of my best friends through that internship. We always like to call it adult summer camp. It was probably one of the best summers I've had. And at the end of that, I decided to come back full time, and it's been a wonderful time ever since. I am a developer tools PM, so I work on everything from Visual Studio Code to Visual Studio, and even work very closely with our GitHub team on GitHub code spaces. I will not be telling you about my day in the life, but if any of y'all are really interested in dev tools, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. And I've just included a couple pictures here of my last 5 years. I've got my team, some hobbies, and of course, my cute little dog, Olive, right there in the middle. So with that, I'm going to kick it off with our first presenter, Sinduri. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Alison. Hello, everyone. I'm Sinduri Raivaram. I'm working at Microsoft for the past 2.5 years. Before joining Microsoft, I did my master's in computer engineering at UCI. I'm loving this opportunity to share my experience with you. Thank you for the Microsoft University recruiting team. I joined through university recruiting actually. Just before 2.5 years, I've done my master's and I did my first interview on campus, and then I came for on-site, and then now I'm in the Azure Edge and Platform team. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Yes. So yes, Sinduri again, working in Azure Edge and Platform team. A little bit about Azure Edge and Platform. So Microsoft has different products, right? Azure is one of them. Like Azure is huge. Where do I fit in that huge puzzle? So in the Azure team, I'm in an org called Azure Edge and Platform. So what is Azure Edge and Platform? So our team, it has engineering systems, it has operating systems and edge products that span cloud to edge and edge to cloud, including media services and incredibly cool hardware. Now you know the definition of it, what exactly I'm responsible for there. Inside this Azure Edge and Platform, I'm in this team called Productivity, Platform and Performance team. In my definition, our team, like our org, is responsible for Azure to run better. Like we help Azure engineering teams and program management teams to develop their cloud services, to develop better Azure products. So we are developing internal services that the other Azure teams, they can consume our services and they can get into better products. So what do I mean by it? So usually, like how does it go? So we write the code, we push the code somewhere, and then we deploy the code. This is the whole develop process, right? So our PPT team has some products that will help you in this process during the develop process. And once you have your code deployed, you should be able to find errors before a user can. Like you should be able to find anything that's wrong with your service and rectify it before a user can come and like face that error. So we have various products again to monitor the services and also to send you calls like when something is wrong to the person who is responsible for it. So this is the whole operate side. And we have support group of products. Each team in Microsoft will be responsible for a couple of services. These services will be owning some resources. Now the management of all these things will get so hectic. So we do have some products that support this support system, like management of your services. And then my favorite part of all this is the improve. So you have a team at Microsoft and you have your services deployed, you have users using the services. Now you should get some insights on the services, some analytics on the services, so that we will be able to make some informed decision on what to work on next, where to put our energy. So we have some products that will help you to do insights and Azure run better. Sorry for the interruption. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry, you just cut out for a little bit.
Oh, sorry for that. Okay, I'm back again. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Day in the life. So before I have become a software engineer, like before even my first software engineer internship, I always used to wonder, like, do software engineers, they write code 24/7 all day? Like, that's not going to be like that. I can't even think about it. But then I soon realized that that's not the case. So my day in the life usually starts with morning coding hours. My productive hours are morning usually, so 8 to 11 block, I just block it out. I go into my task board, like as a team, we come together every 2 weeks, we decide what is the priority. Okay, this week we are going to work on this. This user has asked for it, so we are going to work on that. So I have my tasks planned, so I'll make sure to work on it during the morning coding hours. And then the Scrum meetings. As a team, again, we come together and then we share progresses of each other. And then if I'm blocked on anything, I'll ask my teammates for help. If they are blocked on anything and I can help there. So this is where the collaboration parts come into these meetings. And design meetings. Recently, I think it's been 4 months, I have moved to this new team where we have built a product from scratch. There was nothing. I have started working on it from scratch, like every single line of code. So we had to meet, there were lots of meeting on what are the components of this product. We need to segregate the components and within each component, there are different dependencies. So we had to have this design meetings with the product managers and also with the users who are going to use these products. So, and also these design meetings, you tend to get the bigger picture, and this is where you will learn to convert those user requirements into technical things. We'll talk about that more. And my favorite part of the day is helping users. What do I mean by like helping users? Anything you write, your code, right? Even if it is a small function, small line, ultimately a person will be calling you or a person would be using it or in some other machine would be using it. You need to make their life better. So I would love to spend some time with users who are actually using the service that I'm responsible for, sit with them, okay, get their pain points, and see what I can make it better, or if they have some requirements. Okay, how can I get the requirements, get the context of it, what they actually want, and developing it. So this is my favorite part of the day. As you can see, every software engineer's day in the life is different, right? It won't be the same at all. You need to tailor your day according to your interest and also your team needs. Ultimately, you need to deliver tasks, but also you need to have fun. I can only give my 100% if I am 100% happy. So that helping users part, interaction part, and also sharing my experience part is important for me. Recently, I went to my manager and I asked, oh, I know that there is this small project going on. I love to work on that. I love to drive that project. He happily agreed. So we need to tailor our own day in the life. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Opportunities at Microsoft. This is not a selling slide. This is purely what opportunities for me, like what I felt at Microsoft. So I'm a person who loves taking courses, classes, like what is not only the technical part, like even in the non-technical side. Recently, I did this course, Dale Carnegie Leadership Development. It's just been 2 months. It was a 8 weeks course and I had so much fun there with my other Microsoft colleagues. And that was possible because my org agreed for it. It's not just courses. It could be conferences. You can be interested in anything, even classes. If you want to do a full-time master's, you want to take a graduate course, Microsoft helps you with all that. Even there is tuition reimbursement also, even if you want to do master's. So that's my favorite part. And number of teams working on different products and technologies. So when I first joined Microsoft, I was working in this team. It was that's where I learned most of my software development. It was a great 2 or 3 months run and I was loving it, but I wanted some change. I wanted to do something else. I felt like, I'm through with that project. I know in and out. Now I wanted to do something maybe better also. So I went to my manager and asked, now I'm looking for something else. Do you have something for me? He immediately had some requirements and then I moved to a new team. This is what is best at Microsoft, right? Like if you want to change, there are sister teams. There are some other teams in the same organization, or go out of your organization. Whatever your interests are, there is always a team for it. And it's kind of easy to change internally too. And similar interest groups. I love saying this story. So the second week of joining Microsoft, I was just roaming around the halls. And then there was this big meeting room. Outside that, there was this banner, Toastmasters International, free food. Small letters, it was written free food. I went inside for free food. And then I just got hooked on it. I was there in the meeting for 5-10 minutes. I just hooked on to Toastmasters. And since then, I have been some or other Toastmaster club inside Microsoft. So recently I joined a new club. So whatever your interests are, there is a club for it. It could be Toastmasters. It could be at one point of time, I was very involved in the MS Dance, MS Poppies, MS anything. Like there are so many interest groups. Whatever you are, you can be a part of it. Coding groups. So take it like, not other interests. I just want to get into some machine learning competitions like Kaggle competitions or like some data science stuff, or like I just want to invent something, some hardware, there is Garage. So there are groups and similar interests where you can just get into, and even it's kind of easy to get started if there is enough push from yourself. Like just go get in and get in touch with the people and you can just get started. Ownership. So when I first started at Microsoft, I wanted some component that I own end to end. So for everything, I wanted to be responsible for it. So I would say that was kind of easy for me when I expressed this interest. There were people who were readily agreeing for it, and I got that. So this kind of ownership feeling, it could be a services, it could be a whole range of products. So that's another opportunity. And last but not the least, like what's the best thing I like working here? I'm pretty sure I heard it again and again, but it's the culture. It's the awareness. Culture and awareness for me is being myself, like being this happy, like just kind of silly, like however I am. Like when I'm coding or when I'm working in my day-to-day life, I'm a person who gets frustrations. I'm a person who gets up and downs. I should be able to communicate it and also act accordingly. So I feel like that's really a plus in my team. There was just last week, I was very frustrated and I was able to communicate with my peers. I was communicating with my manager. So that's the best thing I like about working here. And always, like, I believe that a software engineer should be at least 30% program manager, because as we move on our career, the task of converting those user requirements into code, into building blocks, into tech stack just getting bigger and bigger. If we start doing that from day one, it will be easier once you progress in your career. And that's my talk. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Hunter, and I'm a senior program manager on the Azure Control Plane team. I'll go a little bit more into that in a little bit, but let's go ahead and get started with the next slide. So to give a little more clarity on what does being a program manager mean, this is a little bit different depending on which company you're going to, and not all companies provide entry-level program manager opportunities like Microsoft does. So the role I'm specifically talking about is also referred to as TPM. Sometimes people refer to it as a technical product manager versus program. But in general, when you're talking about the PM role, there's one key responsibility, and that is resolving ambiguity. So how do you take an unclear customer requirement or a customer pain point, and how do you resolve it into the weight of that requirement, the specific tasks that need to be done, and how do you ensure that what you're addressing isn't a symptom, but actually delving into what is the pain that is causing the customer, and how do you address the root of that, and how do you build a better product for the customer rather than just taking all the asks at face value. And so a lot of what is involved with the program manager role actually happens very behind the scenes and before a product even comes to fruition. So you have to resolve kind of what needs to be built and why are we building this. And that leads to kind of one of the most interesting things about the program manager role is it's all about leading by influence. So program managers aren't people managers. And so that's one confusion that a lot of times comes up because program managers neither actively program nor manage. You do have in some roles, depending on the product you're working on, you may end up programming some, but it's a lot more about how are you helping the customer? How are you identifying those pain points? And how are you ensuring that the product that you're managing is the best product for what the customers are trying to do? And so what it really comes down to, we have three key leadership principles here at Microsoft. So we call it create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success. And so that create clarity is really the foundation of being a program manager. You also have to coordinate between the engineers and the rest of the world. Similar to as Sinduri was mentioning, that's really almost one of the best parts of the job is getting to talk to the customers and figure out kind of what they're trying to do. How are they trying to accomplish something? How can you help them? And then of course, to hear the aftermath of when you have helped them and to see how they're using the products and how you can make the products even better. But you're also dealing with UX designers, UX researchers, and the entire UX team. So these are the people who are up developing the designs that go into our graphic user interfaces, and then as well as partners. So this can be either third-party or first-party internal partners, but how do you coordinate the requirements coming from those teams who are working with or integrating with your product and ensuring that the engineers have the data and understanding of the problems and what needs to be done as a result of the problems in order to build the best product possible. Then we also represent a product or an area publicly. So this includes conferences, videos, documentation, and it's all about you become sort of the face of the product, that the customers know that if they have a question, you're the person for that product to go to. And it's also applicable for other teams internally. So here at Microsoft, if you're a PM for a particular product, then other teams within Microsoft will come to you first for some of their questions about that product. And finally, it's a lot more high level compared to software engineering. And there's also hardware engineering program managers. And so it's all about how do you get that really high level and see the forest instead of the trees. And so how do you see how everything's connecting and how your product might work with another product set and how this new feature that's being introduced will impact the other features and the perception of the product as a whole. And it ends up being a lot more breadth over depth compared to an kind of stereotypical engineering role. And so you could kind of think of it as PMs help to produce the lists of kind of tasks and features that the engineers then take and figure out how to implement. And so it is definitely a partnership, and you'll see program managers who will get a lot more involved in the implementation side and helping to design the architecture for how a feature is to be implemented. And you also have software engineers who get a lot more involved with some of the customer meetings. But it's this partnership between the engineers and the program manager that really bring products to life. Next slide. So now that you know a little bit about my role, I'm going to go a little more into my journey. So I graduated with a bachelor's in science from Georgia Tech in computer engineering in 2016. And I started out as a full-time employee in July of 2016 with internships at other companies. So this was my first time at Microsoft when I started in 2016. And I started on a product called Azure Automation, which if you're familiar with the PowerShell language, it's a scripting language that's now natively in Windows and is available in most Linux operating systems. This was essentially PowerShell as a service in Azure. So how could you run this code serverlessly? And so I stayed on the Azure Automation team for several years before joining the Azure governance team in June of 2019. And so this was a team switch for me where I talked to the teams and figured out kind of where I wanted to go with my next step. And Azure governance was all about how do you build and scale your environment and really bring it under control, applying guardrails through products like Azure Policy to ensure that people who are building in Azure aren't just building the most expensive VMs possible, and really like making sure that your environment is well managed. And then finally, in February 2020, there was actually what we call a reorg, where two teams can come together or get split apart. And as part of a reorg, my Azure governance team was merged with the Azure Resource Manager team and became kind of the overall Azure control plane team that I included in my introduction. And since the beginning of the year, I've been focusing a lot more on the Azure Resource Manager side, which is the foundation of Azure. And so it's the consistent API and platform that all of Azure is built on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. One other call out I wanted to point out here is all of these kind of blue circles you see are conferences that I had the ability to speak at. And so one thing that was really important to me was that when I first joined at Microsoft, I told my manager that I was really interested in public speaking opportunities and asked him to kind of keep an eye out for me. And so I joined in July, and then that September, we had a big conference known as Microsoft Ignite. And my manager put me in front of 200 people to talk for as part of one of our main sessions. And that I was just so grateful that they were able to take that risk on me and give me that opportunity. And because I was able to handle it, my manager put me out to a lot more presentations, actually even asked to talk to at third-party presentations. So I was really involved with an organization called IEEE. It's a professional society for people with a passion for technology and advancing technology for humanity. And so I got to present at an IEEE conference, and as well as at a few other different third-party conferences. And so my team just continually helped me get out there, which really helped both my confidence as well as helped me to hone a lot of new different skills. And finally, that gray dot you see with the dark gray outline, that was actually an opportunity that my team gave me after talking to my manager about actually speaking to a set of customers overseas. And so I got to fly out to England to talk to a set of customers about our diverse product area. And so there are a lot of different opportunities that are available to you, but you have to just make sure to ask your manager and make sure that anything that you're really passionate or interested in, you have to take the initiative, and it never really hurts to ask. And so next slide. Okay, so my final slide here, I just wanted to give a quick rundown of the product area I'm currently working on. So as I mentioned, Azure Resource Manager is the central control plane for Azure. It's the central platform for all of Azure. And what's really cool about this is because it's this one consistent API that all of Azure is built on top of, we have a lot of different type of customers. And this has been one of my favorite parts about being on the ARM team, is that we have what's called a resource provider. And so these are usually internal teams, but can also be external teams who are using ARM as the platform of Azure to provide a service. So this is like, there's a virtual machine team who provides virtual machine resources. And so we work really closely with them to weigh the requirements they need and what they need in order to build their product. We also work really closely with end users. So this is typically third party. And these are users who are trying to host these resources in Azure and are utilizing Azure for their company or certain projects. And then finally, the last customer set we deal with heavily are called clients. And so this is like the Azure portal, PowerShell, Azure CLI, and all the interfaces that provide a window into how to use ARM and how to interface with it. And so one of my favorite parts about being on the ARM team has been getting to work across these super different customer sets and getting to see how we weigh each of the different requirements coming in order to build a product for everyone. And so with that, I will pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rin, and I am on the Video Data and Intelligence team, which technically also falls under Azure, but it's in the Windows code base. So, and it's a very data science-y role. And I've been on the team for just over 2 years now. I graduated from UW with a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering back in 2018. Next slide, please. So I want to focus on kind of some more general things that I try to think about, and then I'll tell you some specific stories. So here I say mistakes or opportunities. So early on in my career, I had come across something that my manager recommended that I use in the code that I was writing, and I noted that that wasn't being used in a lot of the code that already existed. And I asked about that, and he said, yeah, we just haven't had time to update it. And because I was new and I had a lot of time, I said, okay, well, why don't I do that? So I was going through and updating all of this code, and I didn't realize that the team was actually storing code in 2 different places and that you had to make sure manually that they matched up. And so I took it from one source and then updated both sources using that, and mistakenly overrode a bunch of changes that had been made over the last few weeks and months, and people had to go through and scramble to recreate bug fixes that they had done. And it was a mess. So instead of freaking out and feeling like, oh no, like I'm so bad at this, I just ruined everything, I thought, okay, well, there's got to be a better solution to this, because like we're keeping this code in 2 different places instead of just having one source of truth. And if I ran into this mistake, somebody else is bound to down the road. So I actually ended up creating a source control system that we use that has one source of truth, and that's where everybody pulls from and everybody pushes to, and the other one is automatically updated. And we actually have 2 other teams now that use that as well. So that was a mistake that I turned into an opportunity. Next slide, please. So another thing is looking for ways to make your life easier. So the thing is that a lot of the ideas you're going to have when you're trying to create products are things that would be useful to you, or maybe you see that it would be useful to somebody else. And then you take those ideas and you turn it into something you can use. So for example, I was doing about an hour of work a week, sometimes an hour and a half, doing different data investigations that had to happen every week and check on all these different things. And I kept thinking, there's got to be a faster way to do this. Like I'm doing the exact same motions every week just to get a set of numbers. There's got to be a better way to do this. So I actually took some time on my own, in my own time in the evenings, and I worked on putting together a dashboard for myself to keep track of all of those things. And once I knew it worked and I had it up, I showed my manager and was kind of like, oh, look at this neat thing that I made. And he was going, you didn't have to spend free time on that. Like, if you have ideas, you can work on it during work hours. I said, yeah, but I wasn't sure if it would work. And he said, that's okay. You can work on things you think might not work. We encourage that. So anyway, and that dashboard that I created that was originally just for myself to kind of make my own life easier is now used by several other team members, and it's been featured in several demos as like things that we should be doing to make our work more efficient. So that was really, really exciting and a really cool project. Next slide. And the last thing I want to talk about is culture. So one thing that I try to think about, and that a lot of my teammates I know also try to think about, is doing things that are going to encourage and continue to build an inclusive culture, because nobody's perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but we can always keep aiming for that higher goal. So as an example of that, recently, I guess it's about a year ago now, we had these meetings that were led by the partner level. So that's, for me, that's my boss's boss's boss. And so him and one of his peers were leading this meeting with a lot of the people that report to them, and kind of talking about the values that we needed to have in our culture, and just having a very open discussion. And it was a really great environment. And at one point, someone said something and they kind of teased him, but they were really good friends with him. And I knew that guy, and I knew he had worked with these people for like over a decade, and they were really good friends. And that between them, it was just joking and it was all in good fun. But I also realized, like, other people in the room might not perceive it that way. It might be perceived that he just got teased for speaking up. So I actually spoke up and I said, hey, I know that you guys are friends and that this is just in good fun, but things like that, if you're in a room with people who don't know that you guys are friends and that it's in good fun, it can discourage people from speaking. And they thanked me and they said, that's a really good call out. Thank you for pointing that out. And later, like 2 or 3 weeks later, not my boss's boss's boss, but his peer saw me in the hallway in the building and actually stopped me and said, hey, thank you for calling us out at that meeting. That was awesome. So just to be in an environment where people are thanking you for calling them out when they make mistakes, or like not even a mistake, strictly speaking, but just trying to point out things that we can do to help build a more inclusive culture, that means a lot to me. And to know that I'm in an environment where I can speak up and that I'm thanked for doing so is really incredible. And that's what I've got. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. Now we're going to go ahead and move to the Q&A portion. So reminder for those of you who may have joined late, feel free to peruse the questions that have already been asked in the Q&A, upvote the ones that you'd love to see answered, and I'm going to start asking them to our panelists. So by far, it looks like what folks are most interested in is general tips for standing out and succeeding during your interview process. So maybe if we could go and get maybe the top 2 tips from each of our panelists for how you would encourage folks to think about the interview process, and any tips or tricks you might have for them. And maybe we can start with Sindhu first.
Sure. So the top 2 tips would be resume. Resume needs to be, it needs to convey some numbers. It needs to convey what you have done, and like it could be an internship, it could be a project in your final semester, whatever. Like your resume should be perfect. It should be crisp and tell you what you have actually delivered there. And also, while interviewing, we'll do lead code questions, right? If you're applying for a software engineering position or an internship or a full-time position, we do lead code. So we should have like a kind of contextual doing lead code, like map the questions and also in your brain and see what exactly you're doing. Like, don't go and just bluntly try to answer a question. Just see like, okay, what are the connections? There should be a template, and the template should be suitable for number of questions. So the intelligent rather than hard work, smart work, getting the what the others have been through, reading those discussion page in the lead code. So those would be my 2 tips. And lead code is a process. To this day, I know that all of my colleagues and me, we do lead code. So it's just that lead code is a process, and also even the other competitive things, it's a process. So just keep doing it, and the resume should be perfect with numbers. Those are my tips.
Awesome. Rin, what about you?
Could you repeat the question again? Just
sorry.
Yeah.
So question from the audience is, what are your top 2 tips for succeeding in the interview process?
Okay, great. So yeah, I think top tip, don't, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. I think my top tip is when you're asked negative questions, don't get nervous about that and feel like, oh, how am I supposed to answer this? And don't try to do things like, oh, I'm a perfectionist and that. I mean, I think that's a pretty common joke as a bad answer, but talk about actual things that you messed up on, things where you really did make a big mistake, and don't be afraid that, oh, but if I reveal this, then maybe they'll think that I'm not as good of a candidate. It's not so much everybody's going to make mistakes, and everybody's going to have big mistakes at some point somewhere in their career. It's not, can you never make mistakes? It's, can you reflect and can you learn from those mistakes? So that's the thing, is come in with things that you're ready to talk about and kind of be vulnerable about, that are things that you actually messed up on, but then also be ready to reflect on that and talk about changes that you've made or changes that you're currently working on making as a result of the learning that you got from that situation. And I think the other thing is talking about projects that you've done in classes can be really great and really be a good way to show the experience that you have. And talking about projects you've done on internships obviously are really good for that. But the thing that's really going to be more impressive than just, oh yeah, I did this project that everybody else in the class also did, is where did you go outside or above and beyond that? And that doesn't necessarily mean on assignments, but maybe you have something where you're like, yeah, I had this game that I play online, and there's this action that I had to do every so often. It was really annoying. So I built myself a script that automatically opens things up and reminds me. And so just things that you can come up with that are outside of requirements, but things that show your passion and that you try to expand on your skills. So those are the 2 points I would make.
Awesome. And then we'll pass it over to Jenny.
Yeah, I love this question. I think one key fact that a lot of students, even I forgot at times going into interviews, is that interviewers a lot of times want you to succeed. It actually makes their life a lot easier if you're just a really great candidate. They're not rooting for your failure or trying to trip you up. And one of the key things that a lot of recruiters are looking for is, can you work with this person? Are they able to function on a team? Are they able to collaborate with me on these questions? And would I want to work with this person on a day-to-day basis? And so a lot of times, just kind of coming as yourself and asking questions back and being super involved in the interview process can work really in your favor. The other one I want to kind of provide is a little more for the PM interviews. And so one of the key foundations, especially here at Microsoft, is how do you show that you're customer obsessed? And so how do you get out of your own mind and what you think is best for the customer and what you think should happen? And how do you show that you're taking the customer's needs into consideration? And how you outline that process of what pain points could they be facing, what would be the priority of those pain points for that customer set, and how do you kind of address issues that you yourself might not hit on a day-to-day basis. For instance, one of the questions in the chat that I liked a lot was someone is asking, are you dealing primarily with enterprise users or a standard consumer user base? And it really depends on the product. And you have to kind of understand going in that you might not always be building products for people who are exactly like you. And that's one of kind of the benefits of having a diverse team, is that you're able to kind of help build products for a diverse customer set. But the people you're building for might not always have your same background. And so making sure that you kind of remove your own biases from the equation and are focused on the customer in the problem that's being presented to you is crucial.
Love it. Yeah, I would also add in as a PM interviewer, find a framework for design questions and stick with it. So Jenny sort of outlined one. What are the problems? Who are your customers? What's their goal? What's blocking them from that goal? Even if you can just write that on the board to both center your own thinking and help the interviewer follow along, it can be incredibly helpful. And I would also recommend the same for dealing with software interview questions. Next up, we've all seen some of the news that's come out. It's clear we're going to be working remotely for over a year at this point. We have a question in the chat on how is Microsoft, adapting to remote life, and how do you think the culture has changed, if at all, in the past year? I'm going to pass it to Jenny first because we have a specific question on how do you help facilitate collaboration now that we're all distributed?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the key points that actually creates especially more issues for program managers, but I've also seen from the engineers I'm working with, is we're still getting used to this, and a lot of us are kind of working through this together. And one thing that we're still getting used to is a lot of us were used to being able to go out to each other in the office or see each other in the hallways. And now we have a lot more meetings to try and figure out how to get designated time on each other's calendars. And because so much collaboration is required, we can't just sit in the same room anymore. We have to have designated time on the calendars. And so a lot of that collaboration is now happening over meetings. We're also seeing a big shift on trying to utilize Teams and Teams channels in order to reduce the meeting load as a result and see how much we can resolve just through text chat. But I think the biggest point would also be to kind of like, how is the culture adjusting to this? We've also seen a lot of people really stepping up to provide almost social meetings. I had a really great morale event with my overall organization of PMs where we got funding to just buy local food or to create our own local cuisine. And then we all hopped on a chat and kind of talked about like what that specific cuisine meant to us. And it gave me an opportunity to learn a lot more about my team besides just the day-to-day conversations I have with them about specific product areas. And so I think that we're still definitely learning, but the fact that everyone recognizes that we're in this together has kind of made it a little bit easier.
Awesome. All right, let's hear from Sindhu. See, how do you think remote culture has changed for your team?
Sure. As I think I already mentioned in the talk, like I used to love going to office. Like I have my very good friends working in the team and the sisters teams. We used to hang out, we used to go out. So this remote work, it has changed drastically. I do find that I'm spending less time with the people I work with, even with the sister teams. Before it was very easy for me to just meet a mentor, go there and meet a mentor. Or like I would ask my manager, okay, I want to meet someone from the other teams. We'll just go out for lunch or coffee. But now I have to put little more effort. But with that effort, I would say I'm kind of getting I won't say same experience, but kind of equal experience, setting up random meetings like, okay, let's just meet up and catch up about this. I need guidance on that. So I would have to put more effort on that to be connected with the team and also to be connected with the other people in the same org. So yeah, that was my experience.
Got it. Yeah, we've had a lot of social meetings. It's been really fun to see how creative and inventive teams have gotten as they try and stay close together, even when they're geographically distributed. Great. So we have a couple of questions in the chat on work-life balance. As we get more meetings, it can be a little easier to work into the nights if you're not careful. Rin, can you tell us a little bit about how your team treats work-life balance, your impressions of work-life balance across the company, and specifically how things have been going while we're all at home.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, for my team specifically, I've definitely been impressed with the work-life balance. I had one time when it was very early on, I'd been at the company for maybe 6 or 7 months, and we had an issue and something broke, and I was freaking out and trying to fix it, and the support agent that could help me was in India, and I had to stay at work until like midnight to talk to him, and then he had to pass me over to somebody in China. So then I just stayed on the phone, and I ended up going home at like 2:30 in the morning, which is the only time that's ever happened. And I ended up sending an email at that time because I said, I'm not going to be in the morning because I'm still here. I'm going to sleep in a bit, and here's where the situation stands if someone else wants to pick it up and work on it. And my skip, so my manager's manager, actually came and found me and said, I want to thank you for what you're doing, but I want to make sure you understand that this is not expected. Nobody expects this of you. You don't have to be doing that. And I want to make sure that you're taking care of you and not just going nuts working too hard. So those weren't his exact words, but basically his exact words, part of it was, I want to make sure you understand that this is not the expectation. So just to have that understanding of like, there's the appreciation that, I went to those lengths, but also a clarification that don't make this a regular thing. Nobody wants to see that. So yeah, for my team, work-life balance is definitely, there's a lot of people with family, and there's a lot of understanding and do their best to work around it. And if someone has something come up, okay, I'll pick up that other thing then and help you out with that. So locally on my team, it's been a really great experience. I will say, across the company, from stories I've heard from other people, I think the general culture of the company is definitely moving far away from the stereotypical, like, we want you answering calls at 11 p.m. We want you working all night when we're coming up on a release. I hear very few. I haven't heard any stories about like, oh, we're going to be working all night since I've been at the company. There definitely are teams where you have people that are kind of like, oh, well, this is an important product and I want you to answer calls at 11 p.m. And that's kind of an artifact of, they've been at the company for 30 years and this has always worked, and they don't change easily. But I think the general attitude of the company is definitely going toward, no, we need to have work-life balance. This is important, which makes it a lot easier for people to kind of push for that, and they can push back and go, I'm not going to be available at 11 p.m., but I'll be in at 9 and I'll answer your emails right away. So yeah, that's been my experience and what I've heard from others.
Awesome. Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I've definitely seen the organization and Microsoft as a whole step up to try and help people during these times. A lot of the new policies coming out are really stressing flexibility. And I've seen, especially for a lot of my team members who have children, that they've been given a lot more flexible work hours. I've also seen a few organizations kind of recognize that people are overwhelmed at times, and they've given org-wide days off. My organization or overall kind of group area just made every other Friday a no meeting Friday, so that we can kind of get through some of our backlog and can be a little less overwhelmed, as well as instituting what we call learning days. So giving us dedicated time to learn other skills, to go through the wide breadth of trainings that Microsoft offers, especially through LinkedIn Learning, and just making sure that we have time set on our calendar that we can take to learn new skills or train up existing skills. And so I feel like those initiatives have definitely helped, but there's only so much the organization can do for you. It really takes a conscious effort by each person to kind of, people are going to email you, and especially with the flexible work hours, some people are working very different hours from you. So you have to kind of have defined boundaries for, I will not work after 6 p.m. or I'm not going to check my email over the weekends, and just kind of making sure that you're setting that time for yourself. I've also seen not only what I do, but as well, several people on my team will set time ahead of, like, in the weeks ahead, to make sure that they have breaks in their calendar, especially now that we're all virtual. It's super easy for meetings to be back to back to back, and you just don't get that break walking from room to room like you typically would. And so I think there's a lot of innovation happening amongst teams of how we can address this. Similar to kind of the earlier culture questions, we're still learning and figuring it out. But I think the company is really trying to support us in ensuring that we're able to maintain a work-life balance.
Indeed. The best thing one of my first managers ever told me was, we want you for 30 years, not 3 months. And if you work too hard, could be that 3-month burnout. You don't want that. Cindy, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Jenny and Ryan covered pretty much of it.
Awesome. Yeah, they did a great job. Yeah. So I think with the last one here, let me scroll through all our chats. Thanks for everyone for chiming in and helping choose the questions that we have here. Let's see. We have some interview prep that I know the recruiters are responding to. We saw a couple questions around sort of changing roles or other opportunities within Microsoft. I think, Jenny, you mentioned that you had changed teams at some point, both through your own volition and through a reorg. Perhaps you could speak just a little bit to the culture and process of changing once you're at Microsoft.
Yeah. So I think a lot of, there's no cookie cutter for when you should change a team. I know, like, some people who change teams like just several months after joining, and I've had other friends who've been on their same team for over 10 years now. And what it really comes down to is you have to be constantly aware of what are you looking for from your career, and do you feel like your current team has the opportunities to get you to where you want to be, and are you learning what you want to learn to get where you want to be? And so it definitely requires just consistent, not only kind of introspective thinking and discussions, but also discussions with your manager to see kind of what other opportunities are out there. If you're particularly interested in machine learning, for instance, but you're working on just a really heavy like a database program, and you want to look elsewhere, like, your managers will often be really helpful in just helping get those discussions going and having the connections to put you in touch with teams. We have what's called informationals, which generally you can just reach out a team and ask them to, like, tell you more about their team. And people are super willing to just sit down with you, talk to you about their team, and then see kind of like where it goes from there. It is easier to transfer internally compared to trying to get into a specific team from the get-go when transferring or coming in from external. So I think that's kind of one of the great benefits of a big company like Microsoft, is that there's such a diverse set of teams. Everything from HoloLens and Xbox to Office 365, and the just huge myriad of services that we have within Azure itself. And so there's a lot of different opportunities and a lot of cool things to be working on. And so there's usually a team for everyone and for basically whatever you want to work on. And so just making sure you're having those conversations is super important. Similar for some of the questions that came up about role changes. There's no program I'm aware of that specifically guides you from software engineering or hardware engineering into a PM role. Most software engineers don't decide to become PMs, and I mentioned it somewhere in the chat, but usually it's a ratio of about 4 to 8 engineers per PM, and so there are a lot fewer PMs at the company in general. But it really has to be a conversation of you, like, understanding why you want to be a program manager or a software engineer and what you want to do with your career. Both can go up to almost the VP level without even necessarily, you're not even required to become a people manager up to that scope. And so there's a lot of opportunity on both sides for you to really go up the ladder with your career. And so you just kind of have to think about what's right for you.
Awesome. Rin or Sindhu, do you have anything to add on that? I see we've got about 5 minutes left here.
No, I think that was pretty good coverage.
Yes, true. I completely agree with Jenny about it's easier to get into some team and then internally transfer rather than waiting for some team from external for an external candidate. And it's really easy. There are so many teams, so many interests, so many products. You never have to go outside. For
sure. All right. So I think with our last 5 minutes, we'll do just a quick fun question. For those of you who have participated in Microsoft's Hack Week, do you have any fun tidbits or story you'd like to share? What I will say is that every year they have these enormous tents set up and they always name them like the coolest things. I think there was like Codezilla one year and everything was like Godzilla themed, which was definitely my favorite. And as all good hackathons, they had plenty of food and drinks to keep you ready to go. And there were some people who would literally be there like all night. It's been pretty cool.
I've only done one since I've been at the company, but and I think the coolest experience for me was not so much the project I worked on. It was just kind of something that me and a couple other people were like, oh, let's see if we can do this. But it was seeing people come together. There were teams of like 20 or 30 people that came together from across the company and they'd work on something. And I had a friend that got into one of them and I was going, wow, how'd you come up with that idea? And she goes, oh, they've been working on this year after year. Like they have like a core group of people, but other people are welcome to join in and they just keep iterating on these projects and working on them and improving them. And as I remember, the Xbox accessibility controller actually started as a hackathon project. So it's just really cool to see how people will come up with these ideas that they're really passionate about that might not necessarily be what they're working on a day-to-day basis. But like we had 2 people from our team in the remote hackathon this year that were working on a project with some people from the Xbox team. And this is another thing they've been iterating on year over year, where they're trying to create controls so that you can, I think it's so you can use your eyes to, and maybe even like brain waves, I don't know, but they're trying to set it up so basically like even people who don't have good or like fine motor skills and they have issues in that area or they don't have any control of those parts of their body, that they can still be able to game. And so they were focusing on Minecraft, but it was really interesting to see the project they were working on.
Yeah, I always love walking around the hackathon project fair at the end. It's a really cool space to see the projects that our coworkers are really passionate about, and the fact that our company gives us a whole week just to try and see what we can do with them. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined in. We had such a great time talking with you all. Thank you, Rin, Sindhu, and Jenny for sharing your experiences. I'm Allison again, and we're going to go ahead and sign off. And we hope that you learned something, and we hope to see you sometime on campus in the future.